And again, before we get started, we always have to thank our top tier sponsor, Mitsubishi Electric. If you haven't seen this yet, the most reliable air conditioning system is not an air conditioning system at all. Mind blown. It's actually a heat pump system and many other systems, but Mitsubishi came out with the highest marks by the third-party consumers report. So check them out for sure. You know that I did back in 2020. I installed a hyperheat system. Works in the dead of winter. Swapped out my duct furnace for this ducted Mitsubishi system. Super energy efficient. You can also do ductless systems, ducted mini split systems, variable refrigerant systems for multifamily and commercial, which can work as recovery ventilators. Heat only rooms as needed, and including dry mode. Now, for those of you and your clients who are just not quite ready to make the full electric shift for heating, especially in cold weather climate states with high energy bills, you can use the brand new IntelliHeat A-Coil system, which pairs up an outdoor condenser with the existing indoor furnace. Use the furnace when it's too cold and energy is too costly. Use the outdoor for air conditioning and for heating in the shoulder season. They also like to help you understand what their products are available for the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits and how they match up with indoor and outdoor and what's appropriate for the North and South. Make sure you call a diamond contractor to help you out on your next project, whether you're going ductless or ducted. And you can check out more over at Mitsubishi.com. We also want to thank our second tier sponsor, April Air. It's super important to stay healthy. I know for me, yesterday, I had some of the worst air quality in the country, and maybe even the planet, descend on where I live. And so it was very important to me to have that high MERV filtration in my home. That's what April Air is here to help you do. Increase the air MERV filtration for your clients, humidity control, temperature control, and all that. Check them out over at April Air. All right, so 2024 IECC residential provisions. You know us, we're the Green Home Institute. We've got this course approved for multiple continuing education units, including energy and health under our certified Green Home professional. AIA Health, Welfare, and Safety makes it applicable to your state-based design or contractor license. And you can check out the Passive House Certified Professional Consultant CUs if you need them. Now, before I hand it off, again, you know, we always talk about building better, building above code, whatever that might look like for you. If you can even just start building to the latest IECC standards, designing to the latest IECC standards, starting now. Don't wait for them to come. Just start now, because then you'll be caught off guard. And no matter what your code, your state adopts, you can always guarantee that it's usually watered down a little bit. So you'll be ahead of the game. Now, of course, you can work with us on green building certification. That will get you there. But no matter what you do, understand these codes, start implementing them now ahead of time, and then be involved in the change. So that's why I'm super excited to have Ben Rabe from New Building Institute on today to talk to you a little bit about what's coming down the line, what you can expect, and hopefully how you can get involved. So Ben, welcome, and please take it away.
Thanks, Brett. Let me share my screen here. Hello, everyone. So glad that you're able to join today. I hope it's not too smoky where you are. I know we have some smoke coming where I am. All right. Like Brett mentioned, I'm Ben Rabe from the New Buildings Institute. NBI is a 501(c)(3) nonprofit that works on climate strategies through the built environment. I'm personally on the codes and policy team, so we really look at codes as that lever. My name is Ben. As I've said, I'm based in St. Paul, Minnesota. My role as a project manager really consists of two components: working to advance residential codes nationally through the 2024 IECC process. I sit on the envelope and embodied carbon subcommittee on the residential side, as well as support states that improve their local building stock during the code adoption process and beyond code measures. And that's both on commercial and residential. So here is our outline for today. Giving a little bit of an introduction now, background on the process, and then we'll hop in the 2024 IECC key provisions, both on the residential and commercial side, focusing on the commercial on kind of that multifamily crossover. I have a lot of slides here, so I'm hoping we can go through those quickly and then answer questions where needed, and then still have time to talk about how folks can engage and how the IRA funding, as Brett alluded to, can tie into what's happening in your state. It looks like we have a pretty strong New England contingency. I just spent almost 2 weeks in Rhode Island and had a great time. So glad to see folks from all over the place. All right, I think folks are pretty familiar with the slide that 40% of greenhouse gas emissions globally comes from the built environment, whether it's through electricity or combustion on site. So it provides a huge opportunity and challenge to really get our greenhouse gases reduced. Within the electric sector, we've seen a huge improvement through CFL and LED light bulbs. And now we're really trying to figure out what's next. What's the big things we can do now that LEDs are pretty much ubiquitous. And again, I encourage questions kind of as we go. And I believe Brett will stop me and read from the Q&A, and we'll get kind of content specific, and then we'll open it up to more of a discussion later on. All right, you all are probably familiar with this graphic as well, but NBI really sees codes as a driver to bring up the floor. We know a lot of folks on this call are really kind of going above and beyond what the baseline code is, but the floor is very important because that's the way majority of the buildings are built around the country. So we really look to reduce carbon emissions by having the most rigorous base codes as we can get. And as Brett mentioned, they often get diluted during state adoption. So our local jurisdictional adoption. So we want a very strong base code. For those who aren't familiar, the International Energy Conservation Code is a code released by the International Code Council every 3 years to set out provisions for both commercial and residential housing that's then adopted by states and other jurisdictions. They provided a goal to be net zero, have a net zero code by 2030, which this 2024 code is the first code since that goal's been set. So we really thought it was an opportunity to crank that efficiency up. And a lot of you might know this, some of you may not, that the process of developing the code was voting by governmental members since the IECC was created in the 70s till the 2021 code cycle. This latest code cycle was adjusted to be a consensus committee process, therefore allowing, in addition to governmental members, advocates like NBI at the table, as well as industry representatives. So that, I guess, provided some confusion. There's definitely been some learning as we go, but it's been an opportunity to kind of have a seat at the table. All right, so this process has been slow. All right, I'll pause here. It looks like we might have a question.
Well, Ben, I think it's just important reiterating this because if you read it, International Energy Conservation Code, it reads, to anyone who doesn't know, like perhaps a global standard. If not, if anything, maybe a national energy code that all states have to adhere to. But just to give us some context for anyone who's not aware, that is not actually the case, correct?
Yes, so the International Energy Conservation Code is adopted by jurisdictions. It is observed in other places beyond the United States, but the vast majority of jurisdictions, the vast majority of adoption is within the United States. California and Washington State, for example, have their own energy codes that follow their own trajectory. And on the commercial side, ASHRAE 90.1 is an alternate compliance pathway that has its own adoption process.
Yeah.
I can't remember if I said this. Canada also has a very strong code that is not subject to this IECC process. So international, as Brett alluded, is a bit of a misnomer.
Now, and maybe you're going to get to this, but do you ever foresee that there will be a national energy code and it will just be established by the federal government, even as a baseline where the states, almost like because if I understand right, cities have stretch code above the state, would then states have stretch codes above the federal government? Would that even be possible? Is that even being discussed at all?
I think within kind of niche advocacy circles, it's discussed in terms of like, this is how we really make progress on climate and make more than incremental steps, which I think folks on this call know that we need to be taking bigger steps than we've been making, despite all the progress we're making. That said, I think there is too much of a political barrier to that happening in a realistic way. So I think leaderships by states that really are making strong progress. Another state I didn't mention was New York, that's made a lot of progress through its stretch code, and now using a lot of the provisions in the stretch code are being implemented in the base code is another way to go through it. So when NBI engages with states, we encourage adding strengthening amendments, and those we'll get into a little bit deeper, but we have decarbonization codes available. So if you want your code to be all electric, we have the code language published on our website to do that.
Thank you.
Alrighty, so this is a rigorous process that began in 2021, and the end goal of this timeline doesn't even go all the way to the end, but by January of 2024, we'll have a published code. So we're really in the final stages now, trying to get this thing finalized and let the ink dry, so to speak. So here are the main process is. So proposals were submitted. They go through a subcommittee process. They're assigned a subcommittee based on subject matter, whether it's HVAC or envelope or modeling or mechanical systems. There might be a couple more, but those really capture the bulk of them. There were voted on, required a 50% majority to make it through committee. Then what went into the first report was anything that received a 2/3 majority. And we'll get into a little bit later kind of how that compromise worked. Then another draft is published, and everything in there needs to get a 2/3 majority too to make it to the final code. So this is why having that a third on third on third breakout makes it really hard to get things through, because you essentially need, in a very simplistic sense, buy-in from at least 100% of 2 of those categories, and ideally a little bit more, which slows things down a little bit. All right. I think you all are kind of familiar with these 5 concepts, but these are the categories that I'm going to use to split up the proposals that are moving forward. Energy efficiency, which we're familiar with doing the same amount with less. Renewable energy, we're really looking at on-site generation, mostly PV solar in terms of the energy code. Off-site renewables are also options on some of these provisions. Grid integration and storage, this is key component of electrification. I'd really kind of pair grid integration and electrification together, is that in order to balance out the grid, and avoid having to have a huge increase in production, we need to be able to store energy and have appliances talk to the grid, and life cycle impacts. And this is something that NBI is really just getting into, but a huge contributor to carbon in buildings is the upfront cost of construction or life cycle impacts of primarily concrete and steel, as well as other products. So we're really looking at ways to get to that too. And we are, I believe, hoping to publish an embodied carbon building code, decarbonization building code, later this summer.
Is it, is there any place that's either even currently considering or has embodied energy built into the code?
Not explicitly. We're working on it with a few states. Where states have made progress is by clean ordinances, primarily for when local governments, state governments build their own projects. They're required to provide the embodied carbon statistics on a list of products. Again, concrete and steel being the largest contributors to that. We've also seen this. This is a little bit out of NBI's scope, but within transportation departments too, when it comes to road and bridge construction. And that's about all I can say about that before I get in too deep as a buildings guy.
Thanks.
All right, we'll start on the residential side. I know that that's kind of where the bulk of the housing industry lives. We'll get into this a little bit further, but again, all of you are probably familiar. The residential code applies to multifamily 3 stories and under. Above is the commercial energy code. All right, so this grand compromise that I referred to earlier was referred to as the omnibus proposal, like a legislative bill that kind of pulls in everything together. So basically all the proposals that were able to make it through the subcommittees and consensus committees with a 50% majority, but without the 2/3 majority, so 50 to 66%, were all combined into one document, modified kind of by the different folks involved, and then omnibus proposal was passed, and that required that was able to get that 2/3 majority by allowing some weakening amendments along with some strengthening amendments that the industry folks were most amenable to. So advancement, e.g. EV charging infrastructure for single and multifamily, solar readiness, electric readiness for gas-fired water heater, cooking equipment, and clothes dryers, a slight reduction in ceiling and wall insulation, weakening of some efficiency proposals, and a lot of the proposals were moved through with that 50% margin were moved to either an appendix or into the 408 section for additional energy credits. All right, so through that omnibus bill, electing readiness was required for water heaters, cooking appliances, as well as clothes dryers, and there's an all-electric appliance that includes an all-electric building definition, as well as 3 different compliance methods. Yep. Again, EV charging is something that we're really excited about seeing. It's so much more cost effective to put these in on the front end rather than the back end. So primarily in our 2 occupancies, 40% of dwelling units will be required to have an EV capable, EV ready, or EV SE. And happy to dive into those definitions if folks want to. Solar readiness. So this basically, with exceptions for poor orientation or smaller homes or shading, will require a very minimal amount of solar readiness, with the idea that the cost-effective way for sizing is to match the cost-effective capacity of the building. So all the technology will be there, and folks will be able to kind of hook that solar up when it's ready to go. Other improvements: better windows, slab increasement F factors, lower leakage rate in cold climates, ceiling and wall insulation trade-offs, as well as a cool roof option in 408. On the HVAC side, there's expanded requirements for HRVs or ERVs in below Zone 6, limiting of electric resistance heat in the colder climates, as well as increased requirement for insulation on water pipes. Lighting, this has been a bit of a confusion between the smaller multifamily and larger multifamily. So it's making the lower 3-story buildings match the commercial lighting requirements for outside, knowing that in multifamily buildings there's a lot more outdoor parking and outdoor lighting than there is in single family and 2-family residential. What we are meeting on tomorrow is the 408 section, which requires 10 credits that account to approximately 10% improvement in efficiency for kind of choose your own adventure when it comes to efficiency. So there's an option for renewable energy, a lot of efficiency, as well as I guess, yeah, some lighting options. So these values have yet to be determined, and they're going to get ironed out tomorrow. All right, on the grid responsiveness side, there's demand responsive controls for electric water heaters, as well as an option for a thermostat for a demand control thermostat in the 408 section, and energy storage option in an additional appendix. For additional buildings, additions will be required to meet those additional efficiency credits, as well as kind of more rigorous envelope and duct requirements that exist for newly constructed buildings. Happy to dive into this deeper, but there's a lot of cleanup and kind of consistency within the modeling compliance pathways that make the consistent within the zero energy appendix consistent with our 405 and 406 sections.
What can you go back to the do you plan to expand on this section at all, or can I ask this
No,
question
I'm happy to do that now.
Okay, well, yeah, because a lot of a lot of folks here probably are used to using the energy modeling, probably typically used to using the HERS index rating, which is just a branded version of the ANSI 301 energy rating index, right? It generates that. And so someone might be looking at this energy rating index. What's that? Oh, that's just essentially the non-branded version of HERS for anyone looking at this. But my question when I just quickly looked at this is first of all, what is OPP?
OPP is on-site power production. So
okay,
yeah, the requirements are extended to have to include kind of what that would be with and without on-site solar.
Okay, so I know like the DOE Zero Energy Ready program requires you hit a certain level before you can start counting the on-site solar. Is that what we're reading here? Like in zone 4, you have to be at a 53 or you have to be at a 40 if you're using solar. Is that correct? Is that how that's being read?
Yeah, yep. So so it's kind of trying to account for that difference. And specifically related to the zero energy appendix, we have so all of those energy rating index are set at 42, which as far as efficiency goes, we know we can get that lower, but it was a pretty strong efficiency level. And then for meeting the zero energy appendix, you are at 0, like it's a solid 0.
Right, to meet the zero appendix. Is that something you're going to go over in a little bit?
I do have that included in slides as terms of the IRA funding, but I'm happy to go into any more kind of conceptual detail now before we get into the policy part.
The thing I understand about the zero appendix index, at least under 2021, it's a bit strange because it's worded like you can adopt this voluntary index and people can volunteer to go zero. And it's just like, well, people are already volunteering to go zero and they're not being told that they can do it. So what value does this even bring? What point does it give governments then abilities to enact stretch codes where they're legally allowed to, or incentives? What is the purpose of this? Like I kind of look at it and I'm like, it's kind of a joke,
Yeah,
but
we know that there are good builders who
Yeah.
are already doing this, and it's based on kind of the demand in the market, what
Yeah.
folks want, and committed builders and architects.
Uh-huh.
What the goal of this is to have jurisdictions that have strong climate goals adopt this as mandatory. I mean, it's optional. We know builders can do it. There can be incentives to move forward. There can be other kind of more stick filled route of getting there. But it's really, we want jurisdictions to do this. It's
Okay.
we want to get beyond on one-offs.
Okay.
And for example, there's $2/3 of $1 billion coming to states through the IRA to adopt this. Well, there's a third of $1 billion going to adopt the baseline code. So this is definitely a priority of the Inflation Reduction Act, is to get folks on this track.
Okay.
Obviously, there's a political barrier in states, and these will likely be adopted in states that are kind of more aligned with the federal government, or at least the Biden administration right now. But that there'll be a lot of money incentives coming to get to move these forward. So that's, I guess, kind of the dream scenario, right? Like we really want to see this move forward.
Yeah. And then stepping back to energy modeling, one of my understanding of the intent of the energy modeling pathway is to allow, to go from a prescriptive sort of mandated, you have to do this, to a more performance based, you get to kind of make some choices. But what I know in Michigan, like we have the IECC 2015 watered down code. And even if someone takes the performance route, they still have to comply with all the 2009 prescriptive table, like insulation levels are this and window U value is this. So is the intent of 2024 to really allow for more choice if someone takes this path, or is it going to do the same, like, oh, you still have to follow 2021 insulation levels, but anything above that, you get to start making your choice, which I know starts to become limited, but like, what, you know what I'm saying when I say that?
Yeah. We refer to that as having an envelope backstop, knowing that the building envelope will last the longest of anything.
Okay.
In the vast majority of buildings, especially on the residential side. So efficiency advocates, kind of like myself, we generally like seeing efficiency bed. We love builders to have choice, but we also want to see the items that will last the longest be the most efficient and the least cost effective to change, knowing that you'll have several furnace changes, but you're not gutting your building and putting in thicker walls.
Right. So would there still be an intent to meet like the previous codes baseline? Is that kind of how this
so
still works?
The one compromise is that the envelope backstop has been slightly rolled back to 2008 levels instead of instead of the 2020
2008 levels.
Sorry, not sorry, 18.
18. Oh, okay. Okay. I was like, wow.
No, that was a misspeak on my part, but yes.
Yeah. And there was a good question here, just kind of going back to the OPP versus not. Like sometimes we can read these as solar buy-offs, right? Like, oh, you didn't meet your, like we just talked about, there are these in-place efficiencies, but at some point it just appears that someone could just buy their way out of this by mounting on heaps of solar. Is that potentially what could happen here? Or?
Yes, and then that is a trade-off. I mean, what we're going to see in a lot of places. So, I mean, the idea is colder places like where you and I live, that's less of an option. But in places like Arizona and Florida, that might make a lot of sense. They have a huge amount of electricity production. When you really need that, AC is going to be more cost-effective versus in colder climates. It's really the envelope that's going to be the key driver, especially knowing that even with heat pump technology, that demand is going to be high.
Okay. Yeah, good point. Well, if anyone has any other questions on the modeling, we can come back to it in a little bit, but we'll let you continue on, Ben. So
yeah, we'll segue to commercial / multifamily, and I'll really try and look at these from the multifamily lens. All right. So not surprisingly, on the commercial side, that we were able to make a little more progress. For anyone who's been involved in code development, knows that the residential adoption process is always more controversial. So we've made progress in heating, water heating, cooking, clothes drying, and lighting. Electric readiness requiring for electrical outlet and capacity for for heating and water heating. I know this image is a single family house, but we did not have a good image of a commercial building. But yes, this is kind of the things we're talking about. An incentive for electrification, as well as an all electric appendix. So we see that as big wins on the commercial side. Here are the EV requirements. I believe what's most interesting to this group is that R2 occupancy, which is, multi-family apartments and condos. And so we'll dive a little bit in this difference. I wanted to clarify on what's EV capable, EV ready, and EV installed. So EV capable means conduit and capacity. EV ready means there's an outlet there that you can plug in, and fully EVSE, it means you have the charging station actually in. I guess I can pause for a second to see if anybody has any questions on electrical vehicle. Yep.
There was a clarification question that somebody else helped answer in the chat, which I really appreciate. So thank you for that. But maybe just for anyone who didn't see it, or for the audiences, again, just could you, what is the acronym EVSE, and just expand on what that is? So,
yeah, no, so EVSE is, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank on what what we heard here in the chat was electric vehicle supply equipment. Does that sound right? Supply equipment. Thank you. I very much appreciate getting bailed out by the chat. Yeah, so that means that you're plugged in and ready to go. So the charging station is there, versus I recently had my garage remodeled or rebuilt, and our garage is now EV ready because we don't know exactly what EV we're going to get. So we have we actually had a dedicated box with its own 100 amp capacity and one outlet installed. So my garage is EV ready. When we were in the process, we were debating between EV ready and EV capable, but when you have an electrician, you might as well put that outlet there. When we're talking commercial properties and kind of rapid uptick in EVs is still relatively slow, considering how often the majority of us buy cars. So, we see EVs growing tremendously in popularity, but people are still buying the same number of cars. So it's going to take a while. So this can be a cost-effective option in multifamily buildings, as well as offices where the demand isn't there yet, but we want to do what's most cost-effective on the front end, and then kind of do what the cost is less cost differential later on, like installing the actual station.
Okay, so to be clear, ready means it's ready to plug in the level 2 or level 3 or whatever charger, but installed means it's in, right?
Installed means at the station you can pull up and plug right in.
Okay, but besides level 1, of course.
Besides level 1, yes, yeah. So these are level 2 chargers.
Yeah. Now it looks like next year, if we're all lucky and we're all best behaved, we'll get our nice little V to G, V to B, V to H, right? Vehicle to grid, home, back feeding systems, right? It sounds like they're coming. Yeah. Do you foresee that a fourth iteration of an eventual code being that it has to be one of those types of chargers? Is that a conversation going around?
That is something that we would kind of put in that grid integration category. And we have yet to put out a proposal. Yeah. And I've yet to see one as far as adjusting code language, but it's definitely on the radar of a lot of folks, knowing that car batteries are going to be huge amount of stored energy that can help during high energy use times, as well as possible like brownout scenarios or emergency scenarios. So it's a huge opportunity, especially if I have my car parked in the garage. You can't see this, but I'm working from home, and I don't need my car. So if it's there and somebody else can use that cost effectively rather than having to fire up a peaker plant that in my neck of woods is likely coal, that's a much better option.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if there's any other EV questions, we can come back to those, but thanks.
Cool. Yeah, we're really excited to see this. One more thing that I'll mention on the EV front is that some states really want to see this language coming from the model code because they don't think that in their state statute or legislative rules that they have the building code has the authority to mandate transportation. So this is really important for states that want to do something but didn't feel like they had the option of doing so, which Minnesota fits in that category. So I'm glad to see this coming down the road, and we'll likely have an EV requirement sooner than later. All right, commercial. So within commercial buildings, we've required a small percentage of on-site renewables and off-site renewables when they're not able to meet the requirement cost effectively on site. So we see this very small percentage as a way to encourage or require solar, and then once they're acquired, realistically, folks are going to do what's most cost effective. So using the most area they can based on kind of the energy mix and energy costs in their region. Renewable biomass. So this is important because we needed to clarify that waste wood does not fit the definition of renewable energy because it has a increased carbon impact. So we are, okay using biomass in specific situations, but it needs to be considered on a carbon basis opposed to other production measures.
Is that just for commercial, or is that for all building types?
Just commercial to meet that. It's to meet that renewable requirement from the previous.
Okay, because that requirement doesn't
previous
exist
slide.
on smaller residential, so it would be a mute point.
Yeah. Yep.
Got it.
Cool. Grid integration. This is again a huge area. Smart thermostats will be required, as well as demand responsive water heaters, electric storage readiness for kind of on-site batteries, as well as a credit for a renewable grid integration. So we really see this coming down, and it's kind of part and parcel with building electrification. So huge progress there. Moving to energy efficiency. I'm guessing this crew has a higher familiarity with cool roofs than most builders, so I probably don't need to dive too deep in here. But cool roof expanded to more moderate to coldish climates requirement in 3 and 4 for cool roofs, as well as an envelope backstop. So we dumped in backstop. So we jumped in this a little bit earlier, but again, limiting trade-off for longer lasting energy performance. So happy to answer any questions here, but generally NBI is a fan of these efficiency backstops. Multifamily alignment. So it's really creating consistency between the commercial and residential code here. So builders have they know that if they want to build a 4-story or 5-story building, or sorry, a 4-story or a 3-story building, that the requirements won't be vastly different. And that was definitely the case in the 2021 IECC. So those were able to be at least largely fixed moving forward. All right, so within the credit section in the commercial energy code, they account for another 5% gain here, which includes 32 different measures, and folks who were ready to receive around 70 points, so a 7% savings versus on the residential side, it's a 10% approximate savings. And that analysis on how many points will be rewarded each item is calculated by Pacific Northwest National Labs. All right, additional requirements for thermal bridging. So we know these things that we all love, like balconies and decks, provide a huge amount of breaks in the thermal envelope. So some requirements there to help reduce that. Total system performance ratio. Again, this one I'd be happy to dive in deeper if there's interest, but it's a way to look at the entire HVAC system as a unit and drive that overall cost down. And very simply, it's annual heating and cooling load over the site energy use. So these requirements will be dependent on climate zone and are a way to really improve mechanical systems and encourage heat pumps. Reduction in lighting power allowances. I think what a lot of us learned, especially during the COVID era, is that offices are generally much brighter than we need them to be. Folks aren't reading books, aren't on paper, they're on screens that are backlit. So we don't need as bright a lighting, and it's actually better for us, or at least there's been studies showing that it's better for folks to have less lighting. And demand control ventilation. I think that this graphic is really helpful in like knowing how many people are in the room, knowing what the CO2 level is, and then gauging how much ventilation is necessary to provide safe environments. Especially in kind of a post-COVID world, we want lots of ventilation in spaces that are highly occupied. But if it's just me in a meeting room that's large enough for 20 people, we don't need as much ventilation.
Yeah. So with what you just said, I assume would we be moving from I think an occupancy sensor, which is typically what manage these, to a CO2 sensor?
I believe that this one, I might have gotten ahead of myself, that these ones are occupancy sensors still, but
like it's actually counting how many people are in there, not just whether someone is in there.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, okay. That seems like it's designed to not work very well because it just seems like the sensors, on those things. But I would hope to be proven wrong. I don't get involved in commercial that much, so.
Yeah. Let me double check here. I might take a deeper look on this when we get to questions to make sure that I have that correct. Like I mentioned, I sit on the residential side, so I'm less familiar with some of these.
Well, and I'd also be curious how that transitions into multifamily housing. Would they still follow the traditional residential ventilation and then not be requiring demand controlled?
This is primarily office spaces.
Yeah, okay.
This is existing building energy efficiency. We're requiring a certain number of credits for additions and alterations. It's not kind of the full level, but it's requiring some additional points for additions and alterations, which is really important. As well as energy monitoring and EV monitoring for buildings greater than 10,000 feet. This is crucial for building performance standards that are taking off in a lot of different places. So that's really cool to see. All right, that was the end of commercial. I can pause for a second and clarify anything on the commercial side before we jump into the IRA.
Well, there was a question both for commercial and residential, and that is, where do plug loads come into play in regards to the code? Like, obviously, in my own personal experience, monitoring my energy constantly, I just don't see them showing even up on the monitoring system. Like, and I don't have the best ones, but someone made a good point that as HVAC load and other loads, water heating, go down, plug loads will become bigger of an issue. And they were pointing out like things like 24/7 security systems that just gobble up energy, or whatever, pools, hot tubs, spas, and them sort of in the commercial world, there's millions of things we can discuss that we don't have time for. But where do plug loads come into play in all this? Are they being monitored? Are they just kind of forgotten?
I think that we haven't figured out the right lever. And I know that this is something that utilities have tried to implement as far as their efficiency programs. And codes, at least as far as we're concerned, is not the best way to get at it. I think that it's just that we don't really have the scope of the energy code does not include plug load. So it's hard to get at, and it's a real carbon use, and it's something we'd like to get at. But I've not seen any proposals really getting at that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, appreciate it. Thanks.
All right. So as I mentioned earlier, there is a lot of money coming through the IRA. So 370 billion with a B dollars in climate spending to reduce, I mean, that's energy, including approximately 950 million solar panels, 220,000 wind turbines, and 2,300 battery plants. So these are major takeoffs in the renewable space, and then we'll get into kind of how this plays in the building industry and in codes. So as I mentioned, $1 billion for latest code adoption, as well as that zero energy appendix. So folks that either meet or exceed the 2021 IECC will be will receive incentives through state and local governments, and then that $670 million to implement green code. So getting at how that green or that zero energy appendix matters is this is why. So looking in a crystal ball, I think when folks, including NBI long before I was on, proposed that in probably 2019 for the 2021 code, we did not know this was coming down the pipe, but this is exactly the type of thing that that it is designed to do, is that can create an incentive like this that will strongly encourage jurisdictions to adopt it and not just kind of be a one-off option. All right, how can you engage? So I've alluded to this, but the code adoption process very much differs by states. I believe the majority of states have a statewide min-max code where the state code is the code and folks can choose to build beyond it, but aren't able to kind of take the jump. There are some states that offer that stretch option. California, Washington State, New York, Massachusetts, Illinois is in the process of developing one, a stretch code, which means that the state develops a code, and then there's a stretch code that jurisdictions can opt into, and that really provides two options. So it's not a mismatch, everyone has a different code, but it's either one or the other. And the stretch code really as a way to test policies.
To be sure, a stretch is it, unless there's another definition of stretch code that I'm not understanding. A stretch code is the jurisdiction within the state going above the floor. Is there more to that, or?
Yes. So so for example, Illinois is developing a stretch code that will be adopted by the state, the city of Chicago, by mandate, and any other jurisdiction that wants to, but there's only one option. So Evanston can't adopt a code more rigorous than the stretch code. They get the one choice.
Oh, and so like the state itself can put out a stretch code and say, you can take this and go above our baseline code, but you can't make other stretch codes.
Yeah. And the option that you mentioned works in kind of home rule states. So for example, in Colorado, you can do that.
Right. There are other states.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you can't in a lot of states. So having that one option is a way to create more consistency, but really drive a stricter code.
Okay. Thank you.
So yeah. And then, I mean, so it depends on home rule versus Dillon rule states, but most states don't allow jurisdictions to opt a stronger code. For example, though, Maryland is different in that they have a pretty rigorous base code compared to most of the country, but can allow jurisdictions to do any strengthening amendments they want. So Montgomery County, for example, in the DC suburbs, is we developed a code roadmap for them. And we recommend kind of pulling in a lot of the items coming from 2024 into their 2021 code adoption so they can really get a jump start. So as you alluded, Brett, at the beginning, they're not waiting as a city or as a county to really take that step forward. So as far as however adoption happens in your state, which I know is different, so it's hard to make recommendations, but we encourage these folks to support amendments, strengthening amendments. We have a decarbonization code posted on our website. We have an embodied carbon code coming down the pipeline, and an existing building code that that folks can submit, and it's there. It's published on our website. These code adoption process have a funny rule that if you submit it to them, then it becomes their intellectual property. But if we publish it on our website first, then it is ours, and we make it available to everyone for free. So it's there for your taking. We want it. We want you to come to us with questions. And with that, I'll open it up to your questions about the 2024 adoption process, the IRA, anything else NBI is working on, stuff you're working on that you might have questions on, just pretty much whatever you want.
I noticed you had some other slides. Are you pretty much wrapped up though, or did you have, oh, there it is. Was just one slide. All right, cool. Yeah, well, thanks again, Ben. And before we get into all those questions, just real quick, as a reminder here, the answer to your question, if you're going to ask it, is yes. In most cases, this session is being recorded, and you can rewatch it, reshare it, post it on social media, you name it, and you can go to our YouTube channel and access that right there and get an instant update when it is available. For those of you watching this in the future on demand, not right now, make sure to take your quiz with an 80% passing rate. Once you pass your quiz, you'll receive your certificate. Again, that's only if you're watching on demand. For those of you here live today, check your spam at certs@gutenbergcerts.com. As long as you've been here for the entire CEU session, you'll receive your certificate in the next couple of days, and you'll be able to log that there. And before we get into all those questions coming in, again, we just have to say a huge thanks to our board of directors, our volunteers, our executive director, Jose Reyna, and all of our top tier sponsors, all of our sponsors who allow you to meet and beat the 2024 IECC code, including Rheem and Mitsubishi with devices such as air source heat pumps for heating water, heating homes and commercial buildings. Check them out, and thanks to all of them. So Ben, I wanted to kind of go back to, well, I wanted to think about, okay, someone's looking at this, they're running a business, they're doing projects, they're doing design, and they're saying to themselves, where do I get engaged in all this? And and maybe they're probably, maybe working in one state, maybe several states. And obviously it's the Wild West here, right? Wild United States. We just sort of have a free-for-all code. There's some great comments about people rolling codes back. Not a good comment. I'm glad they shared it, an awful comment, and we hear that. And so it's like, okay, someone's trying to make a decision, and they might be saying, well, first of all, the states I work in, what is the most likely thing to happen next? And so, for example, is there data on states that just adopt the code and they don't cause a big fuss, they just adopt it as is? And that's just usually the typical standard. I mean, I know these days, especially, you never know what's going to happen anymore in a state. But what, just looking at precedent, who, can someone identify if they're in a state where this is going to be minor drama and they're just going to adopt the code and then move on to the next? And then they might from there decide, okay, I know this is coming in 3 years. Here's what I can plan for now. Or maybe I don't like that code, right? I want it to be better. I want it to be worse, or to be fair, I want it to be different than what's being suggested because I have an idea. So I want to get engaged and make the code stronger. And I should spend my time doing that because there's an option. So what I'm getting at is, is there like a scorecard or some details on each state so people can go, yeah, I'm going to get involved in this code process because there is a chance I can make a change versus another state that's probably just going to adopt it and move forward just based on the way things have been. Like, does that make sense? Do you have anything like that?
Yes, I'm putting an infographic through the Department of Energy into the chat that kind of tracks where states are. They also, the DOE through the Pacific Northwest National Labs produces determinations on where states' codes fit compared to the model code and estimates that delta between kind of what they would get if they updated to the most recent model code. So that's widely available for all 50 states and I believe Puerto Rico. So that's something that folks can find very easily through the Department of Energy. And that's really kind of benchmarks where folks are both on the commercial and residential side.
Thank you for that. And for those of you listening to the recording, that is energycodes.gov /infographic. So
yeah, and I think I only posted it. Okay, now it's posted to everyone, so hopefully everyone can see it.
Yeah. And we'll drop that into the link too. I'm trying to see some other, so kind of going back to ventilation, you kind of mentioned some ERVs, HRVs, and climate zone 6, and then you kind of moved out from there. You know, what I mean, is that all we're going to get out of ventilation? Is people who are in the cold climates have to put in an ERV and HRV? I mean, is there any discussion about balance? Because balanced ventilation can happen without an HRV or ERV. It doesn't. It's rare, but it can happen. Is it really just going to be supply or exhaust only for the people in 5 and below, and just leaving it at that, or where are we going with that?
So we proposed a proposal that required 4 and 5 as well, and that did not make it through. So we are in agreement that there is efficiency gains in more moderate climates and maybe even in warmer climates. So we that was one of the proposals that actually made it through the 50% margin and then got negotiated back to just 6.
Okay. Now, are people only pushing for ERVs or HRVs, or is anyone trying to take a middle path that again is just requiring, you know, balanced ventilation versus a full-fledged recovery unit, which, you know, is more efficient, but I know more expensive. So
I think in climate zone 6, it's really, I live in climate zone 6, that having a managed system is beneficial, but in kind of 4 and 5, I think that having a more just having other kind of more manually balancing would be beneficial. I still think it'd be cost effective though over the course of the building to put in a full.
Now, what about air filtration? Are people still allowed to just throw in whatever filter they have? I mean, with, you know, COVID, now with wildfire smoke spreading everywhere, is there any conversation about boosting the MERV or HEPA filtration as a requirement in the code?
I think that there has yet to be the science coming out to really pinpoint what that is. And we saw that in commercial buildings that that everyone just cranked up the ventilation, opened up the windows, and that was kind of the reaction in 2020. And I think that we show that that's not necessarily effective. One thing I learned anecdotally from a DOE or researcher is that who's involved on the health side is that realistically building ventilation does not change enough for folks face to face to really matter. You can be 20 feet away and then have that effective, but once you get closer than that, if you're not wearing a mask, the building ventilation is pretty much irrelevant.
Right, you're talking about viral spread and
viral spread. Yeah, which is different than smoke.
Right.
This is specifically for COVID-19. I should specify, versus when you get closer together, when you are wearing a mask, the mask is doing the work, not the building ventilation.
So there was a question if you could elaborate on the renovation anymore and what
Oh,
that's.
yeah. So
Yeah.
that is requiring a percentage of um, the additional efficiency credits, both on the commercial and residential side, for additions and alterations.
Hmm.
And that percentage, I don't remember offhand, it's in the slides. But it was kind of agreed upon percentage.
And by percentage, you mean percentage of affected building and percentage of efficiency savings?
Oh, sorry. So they're not required to get I guess it's percentage on a certain number of credits that's not as high as the full number of credits for a new building, knowing that the options won't be universally applicable to additions.
Okay. And for additions, obviously the code only comes into play if a permit is pulled, correct? I mean,
Yep.
otherwise someone just doesn't pull a permit and then it doesn't come into play. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a game we're playing.
Yeah.
And
So
every building department interprets that differently. And it's unfortunately not particularly clear in the code.
well, and that brings me into my next question, because we're having this conversation in our Michigan code upgrades. Is the conversation is like, let's just say we put out a net zero code. Let's just do it. Unfortunately, what we find is enforcement to be lacking in Michigan, and I suspect in many other parts of the country, especially as you get out into more rural areas, for various reasons, just lack of resources or political reasons not to enforce the code. I'm not going to name any names, but we have people who come to us building a new home, and I'm like, yeah, hire an energy rater. You already have to anyway because it's code. And they're like, no, the builder said I don't need a blower door test. I'm like, that's a legal requirement in the state of Michigan. And they're like, nope, I don't have to get one. And the builder's like, yeah, we don't use those. And it's just like, okay, we can pass the greatest codes in the world. Where is the conversation around enforcement? And where are you seeing that at?
Oh man, so NVI doesn't really dabble in that front. My former job was working at the state level here in Minnesota, and that is a huge hurdle. It's basically up to municipalities outside the metro area who has the option to enforce. I think in that case, solving that problem would be just making that the state legislature pass a law that say that everybody has to do it, which is the case in a lot of states. I guess the states that are generally leading the way in the energy code have done that. Then within the city department, then there's a huge educational component there. So one thing that they've done really well in Massachusetts is, along with the stretch code, provided resources around education, both for builders and for city code officials. So that's a huge area to move forward. So it's a hard nut to crack, but there's some good examples out there.
Yeah. And kind of on that note, I know there's, do you know what the intention of these codes are for multifamily testing? Because there's always been uncertainty, at least in what I see personally in Michigan, when, you start to get into 1-story, 2-story. It's clearly under the commercial code, but they use the energy renovation or the residential provisions. So then, of course, that activates blower door testing, but it's never quite clear. There's always a lot. I'm like, I don't know what your code inspector is going to enforce you to do as far as testing the units. It could be 1, 2, 3. It could be 10. Some of them might require all. Do you know if there's an intent from IECC to have a certain number, and if that intent just gets sort of washed out in the states and then washed further out in the jurisdictions? What are your thoughts on that for residential?
That is a huge concern. From what I understand from talking to code officials, we work closely with the state of New York on this, and that their take is that sampling is necessary when it comes to multifamily units. There's no way that they can do it without sampling. So we refer to, I forget the number, but it refers to a standard for sampling, and then the ICC will require that. So I think that is kind of where where NBI sits is that if they're going to sample, we need consistency,
Yeah.
and we should use a written standard.
Yeah. Well, great. I don't see any other specific questions here, Ben, but I really appreciate your time. And if you can just remind everybody again, where can people go to either, reach out to you or NBI or learn more about this code process?
Yeah. So please reach out to me with any questions you might have. My email's right there, ben@newbuildings.org, and newbuildings.org is our website, and all of the resources that I mentioned are readily accessible there.
Yeah, great. Ben, Rabe, New Buildings Institute, we really appreciate your time. We appreciate all the work NBI is doing. I follow many folks of NBI on LinkedIn, and I love all the conversation and stuff you're putting out. And so I highly recommend you all to get on. I think you all have a newsletter, right? And some different newsletters depending on what you're doing. So I think you all should check that out. And thank you again, Ben. Take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. And for those of you in the United States, happy 4th of July. We are off next week. So take care. Goodbye.
All right. Talk to y'all later.
Be sure to check out all of our courses available online that you can watch anytime and anywhere to pick up your CEUs. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube to get weekly updates and stay up to date on green building science courses, webinars, and home tours. Thanks again.